irrespective of Turkey's boxing league, Dana White or no Dana White, TKO or no TKO, Eddie Hearn is in decline. His company's in decline. I'm talking about the boxing division at least. Maybe not the darts and snooker. Perhaps they're doing better than ever. I'm not sure. I'm not really into those sports. When it comes to the boxing, they've been in decline for quite a while now. Now, some of you guys may remember that I made a number of videos. This one was from 9 months ago, but there are many, many others, at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 others, much earlier than this, where I started saying that Matchroom are in decline, that they've peaked, and they've gone over the crest of the hill, and now they're starting to go into a bit of a trough. And the reaction, the backlash from the Matchroom fanboys was insane. I mean, these guys, again, they attach themselves emotionally to a promoter like it's some type of football team. And many of them, because I've been so critical of other promoters like Frank Warren during a time when he wasn't doing well with his business, and he wasn't putting on great shows, and he didn't have a deep stable of fighters, the Matchroom fanboys assumed that I was like them, a fanboy too, because I was giving Eddie Hearn credit and giving his company credit for the good shows and the good things they were doing. They thought, oh, wow, he's one of us. He's part of Team Matchroom. No, I was never part of Team Matchroom. My motto on this channel for years has been, no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism, and ditto for promoters. No promoter is below praise. It doesn't matter whether I personally like them or not. If they're putting on good shows, if they're putting out good content, I'm going to give them credit for it. You know, there was a time when, because Eddie Hearn was flying so high, it became fashionable among some pseudo-hardcores, right? People who like to think of themselves as hardcore boxing fans, but they're really just casuals, yeah? It became fashionable among them to always bash Eddie Hearn because Matchroom had taken boxing so mainstream. But, you know, I'm not one of these people that tries to win brownie points by just bashing people who are popular. You know what I mean? To me, that's sad. It's corny. If somebody is putting out good content, good shows, if they've got a deep stable of fighters, if they're engaging with fans, because Eddie Hearn did change the game. Let me tell you something about Eddie Hearn, right? Eddie Hearn did change the game as far as promoting it with regards to PR, because he was the first major promoter that I'm aware of in the world who would engage directly with fans on social media, who at events, at his public workouts and stuff like that, would actually talk to fans and do interviews with randoms. Frank Warren was never doing that before. In fact, when Eddie Hearn started doing it, Frank Warren used to criticize him about it. Frank Warren used to actually mock Eddie Hearn for being on Twitter. Think about how backward Frank Warren's thinking was at the time. It took a lot. I mean, he's not on Twitter now, but, you know, he has a account on there which is run by somebody else, maybe one of his sons or a member of his staff, right? But Eddie Hearn was the first boxing promoter that I'm aware of, the first major one anyway, to, as I say, put himself out there in front of the fans and really engage. He saw the way that social media was changing interactions, yeah? And he realized that there was an opportunity there by making himself more accessible to help promote his events and help promote his fighters. And obviously, Eddie Hearn's a good talker, you know, very charismatic guy, so on and so forth. So Eddie Hearn did change the game, not just in that way, in other ways too. Yeah, so I've always given Eddie Hearn his flowers. But when he got carried away with his ego, that was the start of Matchroom's decline. When Eddie Hearn started saying he's invincible and Frank Warren is not competition, remember when he used to come out with all this stuff? And then obviously Anthony Joshua lost the first time against Ruiz, and you could just see the direction these things were going. You know, you could see that Eddie Hearn's hubris was going to come back to bite him. And that's what we've seen. It's been a gradual decline. And I mentioned it well over a year ago the first time. Might have been 18 months ago. Matchroom fanboys were at my throat, attacking me, saying there's no way there. I mean, one of the funniest instances was when Eddie Hearn signed Andy Cruz. And I had a bunch of people in the comments of the video I did about that signing saying, see, How can you say Matchroom's in decline? They've just signed Andy Cruz. Bro, Andy Cruz couldn't sell out a local shopping mall. And I said it at the time. Nobody is going to turn out and buy tickets to watch this guy. Yeah, he's a good fighter. He was obviously a elite amateur. But the fortunes of a promotional company hinge on how much money they make. How much money do you think Andy Cruz is making for Matchroom? And it was obvious from the start he weren't going to make Matchroom a load of money. Like, come on. But again, fanboys are so desperate that logic escapes them and reason escapes them. So, yeah, Matchroom have been on the decline for a while, and it is only going to continue as far as I can tell at the moment. Will they come out of this decline and go into an upswing? Perhaps, but Eddie Hearn has long said he doesn't plan to stay in boxing as long as his dad did, as long as Bob Arum, Don King, Frank Warren. He's long said this. And he keeps constantly saying that boxing is the worst business in the world. You don't hear Frank Warren saying that. You don't hear Bob Arum saying that. You don't hear Don King, even though Don King's not a factor in boxing anymore, but you don't hear these guys saying that. They relish the cut and thrust and the cutthroat nature of the boxing business. That's why they've been in it so long, particularly a guy like Frank Warren. He relishes all this stuff. He relishes the competition. He loves the back and forth with rivals and all that type of stuff. Loves it. Yeah? And that's why Frank Warren, unlike Eddie Hearn, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, nothing wrong with that. Yeah? I'd love to have been born with a silver spoon in my mouth. but that's why Frank Warren is a self-made man. He grew up on a council estate, working class, literally came from nothing and turned himself into a multimillionaire, doing deals with the Saudis and all this kind of stuff. That fighting spirit, not necessarily for physical fighting, but, in business, was always in him. Yeah? He was just born that way with that type of fighting spirit, and that's what allowed him to rise up out of his humble beginnings and become so successful. And so he retains that same spirit that he was born with, even now in his 70s. Whereas Eddie Hearn, the way he talks, it's like he doesn't really have that type of spirit. Maybe he's a front runner. Maybe he's, like a boxer who looks great when they're dominating a fight, but when they come up against adversity, they want to pack up their tent and go home. Is Eddie Hearn like that? He makes out as though he isn't, right? He wrote a book called Relentless and talks about how nobody can outwork him and this, that, and the other. Well, the real test will be over the next few years because, again, we've got this Dana White, TKO, Turkey Al Sheikh thing. Also, Frank Warren pretty much owns the heavyweight division now. You have to imagine that Anthony Joshua is just a fight or two away from retirement. And that was the big cash cow for Matchroom for many, many years. They were really putting all their eggs in the Anthony Joshua basket. So when he goes, does Eddie Hearn retire? Does Eddie Hearn walk away from the sport once his contract with DAZN is up? Now, one of the things that actually might point in that direction is the fact that Frank Smith, who is the CEO of Matchroom, has openly been talking in recent interviews about walking away. And in fact, Eddie Hearn said, you can see on screen this interview that Frank Smith did with IFL TV. Eddie Hearn actually said in another interview that he sees Frank Smith retiring before he does. And this is in stark contrast to what Eddie Hearn was saying a few years ago when he said that when he retires, Frank Smith will take over. And Frank Smith's one of the best operators in the world. And, he's always singing Frank Smith's praises. But Frank Smith apparently has had conversations with Eddie Hearn behind the scenes and let him know that, no, he's not going to be sticking around for that long. And he wants to go off and live a life away from the cut and thrust of boxing. Frank Smith has openly admitted he's not really a boxing man. He's a businessman. And that Eddie Hearn is the boxing man. Well, yeah, Eddie Hearn is a boxing man in the sense he was raised in boxing. But he's not really a Frank Warren, is he? As I've said previously, in terms of the passion that he has for this particular business. And one thing that Frank Warren says, and this is true in life and in business in general, is that the reason, or one of the reasons that he's been so fierce, a competitor in the world of boxing, is because he doesn't know anything else. He always accused the Hearns of being accountants, right? They're accountants and their fingers are in many different pies and they are promoters of various different sports. Whereas with Queensberry, they're all in on boxing. Frank Warren is all in on boxing. And when you've only got one thing, you have to make it work. Do you know what I mean? That's when you have to make, because you've got no other choice. When you've got options, well, you don't have to make this thing work because you got that thing and you got the other thing. With Frank Warren, all he had was boxing. That's all he knows. So he has to just keep marching forward, regardless of how difficult it gets. When he was in the wilderness with Box Nation, that really was the boxing wilderness. Frank Warren just kept marching forward through the hail and the snow and the drought and all that type of stuff, right? The opposite of snow and rain. But yeah, when he was in the wilderness for all those years, he just kept soldiering on because he had nothing else. Not that he was a poor man or anything like that, but in terms of what he was going to do with his life, there was no alternatives for a guy who's driven in business competition and whatnot. Boxing was all he knew. Boxing is all he knows. Whereas the Hearns have got options. Yeah, Barry Hearn, a chartered accountant. Eddie Hearn, involved in the family business, and they're diversified in various different sports. And also Eddie Hearn, growing up as a rich kid, as I say, didn't need any type of real drive to get himself out of any type of situation because the family's got money. He could just live a life of leisure if he chooses. That's always been an option for him. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments. Firstly, with regards to Turki Al-Sheikh backtracking on the stuff he said about the boxing league crushing all the promoters, and also the decline of Matchroom, particularly with Frank Smith coming out, revealing his plans to leave. Now, a twist would be Frank Smith leaving Matchroom and then joining one of the other companies. Imagine what a backstabbing Judas move Eddie Hearn would perceive that to be. Is Frank Smith that devious? It's business at the end of the day. People do that kind of stuff all the time. Would Frank Smith do it though? Yeah, because Matchroom gave him an opportunity. He literally worked his way up from being the T-boy at Matchroom to being the CEO. Yeah, that's a lot of graft he's obviously put in, being the T-boy and so on. And maybe he would like to leave Matchroom because despite being CEO, does he still feel like he has, or he's looked at as the T-boy? Maybe he feels like he'd get more respect in a different company down the line. And when somebody in the position of a Frank Smith leaves a promotional company, there is often, as I understand it, a no competition clause in their contract whereby they're not allowed to take up a similar position in a rival company for a set period of time. Yeah. So you do wonder whether, Frank Smith could leave Matchroom and then a year or two later pop up working for TKO. I mean, I swear I saw a thumbnail, didn't actually watch the interview, of Tom Loeffler saying that he's going to be working with TKO. Tom Loeffler, some of you guys may remember, was working with Gennady Golovkin for many years and also the Klitschko's. I think he was part of K2 Promotions. So will we see that with Frank Smith? Or is he genuinely just sick of the boxing business and he wants to, use the money that he's made, and he's surely made a lot of money. I'm sure he's a millionaire at this point. The money that he's made with Matchroom to go into, other things, investments, relatively passive income, get married to Emily Eubank, right, his fiance, have their kids and live happily ever after. Maybe that's what he wants to do. Because, this was a guy who, from a very young age, was working for Matchroom and was busting his backside. Maybe he's tired of busting his backside, maybe he in his early 30s, I think Frank Smith's only about 32, 33. Maybe he feels like life is for living and he doesn't want to be like these other guys in boxing. Even Eddie Hearn and whatnot. So yeah, and that's the one of the things, I was talking about Frank Warren being a self-made millionaire because he had this tremendous drive and whatnot. He was born with this drive in him. That's what allowed himself to rise up out of humble beginnings. Frank Smith has obviously got that to some extent, but does he enjoy it? Because Frank Warren enjoys the competition. He enjoys battling with other people and so on. You can tell that he's a fighter in that sense. He relishes battles and beefs and all that type of business. Maybe Frank Smith wanted to improve his life and wanted to be rich and wanted to be successful so that he could relax, not that so that he could be battling and competing his whole life. Maybe he's not addicted to that side of it. Maybe to Frank Smith, it was just the means to an end. It's just a necessary evil that he had to be in boxing, fighting with people and all this type of stuff. Are you surrounded by mindless bots in human form who adhere to the norm and blindly conform? Who swallow all the mainstream BS and actually ridicule you for questioning things? Do you wish you had more free-thinking individuals in your life to network and converse with? Well, look no further. We're right here. Come and join the Brotherhood of Reason on Patreon. You'll gain access to my weekly topical content where we take deep dives on an endless variety of subjects, as well as my vast back catalogue of podcasts, videos, interviews, movie decodings, and my Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You'll also get to talk and network with myself and hundreds of other people in our members chat. You can enjoy all this via the Patreon app or on desktop and download all my podcasts in high-quality MP3. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time, just like Netflix, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Just download the app from the Play Store or the App Store, or simply visit patreon.com on a web browser. Then head on over to my page and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. All the links are in the description box below. And just a quick money-saving tip for Apple users. If you purchase your Patreon subscription on the desktop site or on Android, then you'll avoid the ridiculous 30% fee that Apple charges for purchases made on the iOS app. So if you're on iPhone or iPad, save yourself some money by buying your subscription on the actual Patreon website or on Android because it's a lot cheaper. Once you've made that initial purchase, you can then use the Patreon app on your iPhone or iPad thereafter to access and enjoy your content as normal.